Hi, this is Joe Chambers. Welcome to Musicians Hall of Fame Backstage the Vault Series. Today's clip was shot back in 2004 here in Nashville at Garry Tallent's Moondog Studios. Garry talks about how he met Bruce Springsteen, how the E Street Band got together, how they got their name, and how things aren't always like they look from the outside looking in. It's a lot more struggle to becoming a big famous star than what you might think. Hope you enjoy this story. If you do, be sure to hit like, subscribe, and the notification bell so you don't miss any of our new content. Once again, my good friend Garry Tallent.
And okay, so how did the Springsteen thing evolve? What happened?
Well, as far as I'm concerned, I mean, I met him at this club. We would jam. I was eventually this after hours club I'm talking about, the Upstage it was called. There were a lot of guitar players, and they would come in to jam. It was basically headhunters. A new guitar player would come in every week trying to show off and blow everybody else away. And so there was a shortage of backup musicians. So the owner of the club hired a drummer and a bass player, myself, and a guy named Big Bad Bobby Williams, who was a drummer. We got paid $15 a night to just be there to back up whoever came in. That was part of my gig, was just backing up all these guys on the cuff, or just kind of like whatever they come up with, which was also a great education. And Bruce kind of came out of that. At first he would come in with his band and all that, and as that kind of fell apart, then I'd be playing with Bruce that way. We all kind of knew each other, and I played in a band with Steve Van Zandt. And at that point, somewhere in there, David Sanchez showed up at the Upstage and just playing great. And so I said, okay, come here, you're joining my band. And time went by. I was also playing with a band called Little Melvin and the Invaders, which was like these older black guys who played, the Piners Lounge and the Off-Broadway, the other side of the tracks. And I was the funky little white boy who they hired to play bass with them, and that's where I met Clarence. Clarence was the saxophone player with them. When I got a chance to play with guys my own age, and up to that point, I was always the little kid, in these older bands, and so Steven and Bruce and all those guys were my age. So those are the kinds of bands we tried to get going, but sometimes you had to work. And you'd take a gig with a lot of other bands because they were working. We put together a band with girl singers and horn section, and he was writing new material for that band. I think the biggest influence at the time was Van Morrison, all the Band and Street Choir records, very R&B, funky feel, and some real cool things came out of that. And we continued doing that for a while until it was just carrying around 9 people, in horn section. The drummer punched out the horn player right before a gig, so he couldn't play. All this craziness went on, and we finally gravitated and got it into a 5-piece group. Became the Bruce Springsteen Band, and then I guess by '72. Bruce went to New York. He kind of disappeared for a while. The band moved to Virginia because we had a good following in Richmond. We could work in Richmond.
Without Bruce?
Well. With Bruce.
Oh.
And so we were starting to do that, and everybody wound up moving to Richmond. And then all of a sudden Bruce left. He went back to New Jersey, and he actually went out to California to see his folks, and then went back to New York. And in that period, got to deal with Columbia as a folk singer, as a solo artist, and in that time I was playing with David Sanchez, and we were actually doing some work at a recording studio there, doing some sessions and stuff, and just kind of figuring out what the next step was. And the next
Did
step
y'all know that Bruce was coming back, or?
No, nobody knew what was going on. Stephen was there, so we kind of had a band. We played once in a while.
How'd you get the name?
I'm sorry?
How did y'all get your name?
The E Street Band? Well, after Bruce called David and I to rejoin him to do the first album, that was kind of the beginning of that band with Vinny and David and everybody. We didn't have a name for the longest time, and then we kind of decided we needed a name. And David Sanchez lived on East Street in Belmont, and I had a car that would actually get us to the gig, so I would leave and pick everybody up, and so David was the furthest one south, so he would get picked up last and dropped off first. He had the prime thing. So, you know, at the end of the night, we were leaving, we'd usually be from Richmond or from Philly or whatever, and we'd be heading back home, and you'd get behind the wheel of the car and say, okay, next stop, East Street. You know, and that was David's thing, and just East Street, the East Street Band, kind of, it was really just a means to an end. I never thought it was any great name. We just needed a name. So the East Street Band it was, and it has been ever since. We packed up and we moved back to New Jersey. David Sanchez also. We kind of all packed up our stuff together and went back up there. And
That was pretty ballsy to do that, with married and...
yeah, it was. It was a rather crazy move, really. But we did believe in the band. I mean, it was a good band. It's, you know, we believed in Bruce. We believed in all of us together.
What did you think when you got through with that first session? When you, what was going through your head? You know, you do the session, you went back. You kind of like, well, that's that, you know? Or
I don't know.
You didn't know?
You know, you can't really hope for too much. But I like the songs. I mean, he wrote all these songs. These are the first time. This was the first time that I'd heard "Blinded by the Light," "Spirit." I hadn't even heard those yet. "Saint in the City," growing up. You know, just all the things from the first album. And, you know, it was, and I had some experience in the studio. Bruce didn't have a whole lot of experience in the studio, and nor did Vinny. And it wasn't easy getting through those sessions, but we got through it, and quickly, and we didn't have any time. I really don't remember how long it took. It couldn't have been more than 2 days. I could be wrong.
how long before you started actually?
8 years.
8 more years?
8 years before we started making any money, you mean? Making a living?
From the first album?
Yeah.
8 years from the first album.
The first album was 72.
Okay.
And we went out and we were building a reputation slowly. We did the second album, which took maybe a week or so. And even then, you know, I mean, it was like I was living on $35 a week. You know, we were just out there. We were working, but I mean, the expenses were so much that you'd wind up, you know, just breaking even. I mean, even then, no one was paying taxes, so, you know, wound up getting in all kinds of trouble over that. Yeah, there was no money. Even, I remember being some airport somewhere in the Midwest, Nebraska or Iowa or somewhere, and somebody showed us the Billboard magazine where Born to Run had hit #1 in the album charts that week. We were out there slogging away. I mean, it was no big star time. It never was like that. We were just out there building a fan base on the live shows, and that continued. And then after that, I mean, we're talking about, there's books written about this stuff. But yeah, it wasn't until 78, 78 was the end of the lawsuits. 1980, I think, was the River Tour. I think that's the first time that we ever made money touring, or anyhow.
Were you able to, during that period of time, were you still having to do other jobs to make ends meet, or were you, is that strictly living off the band?
I didn't have time to take a real job, but yeah, I supplemented income. I was writing record reviews for Crawdaddy magazine. Do you remember Crawdaddy? basically whatever you could do. Even then, I was working on guitars, repairing people's guitars and stuff. And yeah, there were definitely times, and actually at the time I was married, and my wife had a job, which actually she supported me through a lot of it. I'd have a place to live, and without her, I don't know, it would have been that much tighter. But yeah, it was certainly, everybody thought that, we were on top of the world back then. But I remember there was a club up the street from where I lived. It was a band called Backstreets was doing a tribute. We hadn't even died yet, and they were doing a tribute. And they're playing in this club, doing all of our songs, and bringing down a pretty good chunk of change. These guys in this tribute band were like, driving, new used cars, and we were like, we would have gone to unemployment, except it was too embarrassing. So, yeah, it was very, very tough.
So when did, for a happy ending here, when did things actually turn around and be like they should have been for you guys?
Born in the USA. Born in the USA was bigger than anything that we ever dreamed of, and just took us all by surprise. I mean, things were going well. We had a good fan base. The river was, things were starting to build there, and we were playing in Europe a lot, and shows were going great, and it was great. And finally, people didn't have to worry about paying their rent. Everybody was okay, and Born in the USA. We were in Australia because we had gone from doing, we had even done some arenas in the early 80s, certainly in New Jersey and New York and the areas, California, where we were well known. And in Europe, all of a sudden, not in Europe, Australia, we got there, and there again, you're on the road, you're oblivious as to what's going on. And we got to Australia, and it was like we were trying to figure out who had landed. I mean, the paparazzi was out, police, everybody going crazy. And we go to the sound check, it's in a stadium. We're playing outdoors to like all these people, and I had no idea that, Born to Run had just, Born in the USA had just taken off. All these Borns, I get them all confused. Born in the USA had taken off in America and, in Australia as well. And so yeah, that was an incredible 18 months. We went from being kind of a cult band to being, like up there with Michael Jackson. Everybody owned the record. It became one of those things that people would buy the record, not even knowing the music. It was the thing to buy,
right.
like Thriller or something before it. That record wound up selling like over 20 million copies worldwide. So, and nothing really changed for us. It was still us, kind of doing the same thing, except all of a sudden, you got to travel a little better and stay in better hotels. And so, yeah, it was, I'd say it's over, after 15 years, an overnight sensation.